Well, everyone, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome to the podcast. Today our guest is my friend and yours, Christian Cassidy. He is the executive director of Trees Winnipeg. He also is a local historian who has a blog, WestEndDumplings, and has appeared in many publications, Winnipeg Free Press. I'm sure if you've read some local works, you will have heard of him. But if not, we're here to introduce and talk a little bit about what you see in Winnipeg and what kind of sense of place you have about us and who we are a little bit, and some history if you want to drop it. And anyways, I'll stop talking. I'll let you get.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much. My pleasure to be here. I used to do some radio, so it's kind of nice to be back in a recording booth, sitting in front of a microphone. So I've a local history blogger. I live in the West End, and have always kind of lived in and around the downtown. So that's kind of my frame of reference for the city about what you see and that sort of thing. And really, what I've seen in recent years is, despite what I think you read online and in the papers, a huge amount of growth. Like the type of growth we've had in Winnipeg in the last 10, 15 years, we haven't seen since the early 70s, and that's residential buildings and commercial buildings. So on that side, and I think of the downtown as the greater downtown, like not just the central business district, but, the Exchange and Waterfront Drive and, places like that.
And I think that's different to a lot of people, when you're trying to describe Winnipeg. I think depending on where you are or where you grew up, you have a different sense of where things start and end, maybe.
Yeah. I think a lot of people think of that little strip kind of between Portage Avenue and Broadway is downtown, but I think you have to look at it in the bigger picture. And I've seen a tremendous amount of growth, and a lot of those old 40-year parking lots getting removed. So that's kind of on the good side. I think that has been there. But I've also seen a lot of missed opportunities. This period when we've had a lot of private development come into the city, we really had to have made a better effort to kind of make sure that the people who live downtown, the people who came before all the high-priced condos, were looked after, and the people who were underhoused got looked after. Try to find some way of having tied those two things together, that everybody was benefiting from the development. Mm-hmm. Even things like a walkable neighborhood. I do walking tours around the downtown.
Yeah.
It's a terrible place to walk people around. Like, try to get from the Hotel Fort Garry to the Burke & Cummings Theatre. Right. There's not a good route.
Right, that's a place you should have a good route, right? People are going to come in to see a show, or that's the natural kind of movement for people.
Broken sidewalks and lock-along parking lots and things like that, and so that part hasn't been thought about. We've added a lot of people, but there was no kind of thought about, these people have to walk around and ride their bikes and take their dogs out to a dog park. And that got completely forgotten, along with, like I said, the people who were kind of originally lived in the downtown that were getting displaced by it. And so it's kind of a best of worlds and a worst of worlds that I think we've kind of created downtown.
That kind of sounds like a motto for Winnipeg. I mean, we've done so many aspirational things. Like the Human Rights Museum is a big project. Yeah. We're a small city town with big ambitions, but it seems like we kind of only get halfway there sometimes. Yeah, I mean, that's something that I see a lot in Winnipeg is we have that image of like that golden era sort of Chicago North kind of boom, where we had this sort of great city ambition, and then you see all these spots where it looks like they expected another building to be put up there, or there was it was designed that like they assumed something else would be in place there, and we have all sort of some of these empty walls, some places that could maybe have a certain kind of beautification and I mean, Winnipeg as an art city, I think, is something that we do a lot of, but I don't think we really embrace it the way we should.
Yeah, and that was, that's one of the things with the Exchange District, right? Who got displaced with a lot of that development? It was artists.
Yeah.
Who was living in those old warehouses that, most of them illegally living in those warehouses. It was bands, and it was painters, and it was sculptors.
All kinds of, creatives,
we just let that all go, and it's like, somebody, Chinatown, just on the other side, that could have been a great place for somebody to say, okay, we're going to displace these people. But no, I think you're right. I think we... we've relied a lot on the mega project to solve city issues, and I think one of the first kind of mega projects was in the City Hall, public safety building, concert hall, that whole kind of late mid 60s to early 70s, and kind of thought, if we just demolished these places around here, everything else will fix up around it. It didn't do that. We did that again with the downtown in early 70s. So, 1969, there was a downtown redevelopment plan that was brought into place, and the city used that as an excuse to bulldoze many square blocks of that, just bought up hundreds of properties or expropriated them. Everything from schools to, and people don't think of that part of downtown from, say, Graham Avenue to the Assiniboine River. That sliver there. That was a completely residential neighborhood.
Really?
Little bit of small scale commercial, but for the most part it was big houses that, kind of by the 60s were kind of rooming houses by that time.
Okay.
Small scale apartment blocks, townhouses, and the city just went in and just destroyed all of them in the hopes that this downtown development plan. And some things came in, like the convention center was part of that. The Lakeview Square development next to it, where I think it's the Delta now. It was the Holiday and the Holiday Towers and all of that came in, and a few, Chateau 100 and Place Louis Riel, and a few big developments did take place, but it left a lot of empty parking lots. And we spent a long time recovering from that, and some of them are still empty parking lots, 50 years later. And so that was another kind of the mega project will take care of it. Portage Place, same thing, right? Portage Avenue was in terrible shape, so it was like, let's knock half of it down. We'll put a suburban style mall, right in there, and that'll solve our problems. And we just kinda,
malls are the answer, right?
Yeah, we just kind of jumped and it's not just us. We followed suit with what a lot of other North American cities did at the time, clearing out old residential neighborhoods, building a mall downtown. And we just sort of followed suit, and we've never, we've looked after that. We've gone for that kind of big development that's going to change everything. And not kind of worried about the fallout from it. And then the fallout is what bites you in the bum 20 years later. And I think even, see some of the big American cities. All these downtowns had this renaissance over the last 20 years, whether it be San Diego or, New York and
when they figure out how to make it livable again, right? Like you just understand that people, want restaurants and they want to be able to get there comfortably, and they want,
and there's this huge renaissance, but they didn't look after the people who were going to be downtown all the time. They got displaced from housing, they lost jobs, they couldn't afford to eat or buy an $18 pint. Now they're coming back into these inner cities, and these inner cities that, like I said, had a great renaissance for 20 years are suddenly having horrible times with homelessness and things like that. And we just sadly we followed suit, with a lot of those things, and we're seeing the same thing kind of in our downtown right now. In and around our downtown is that we thought, the waterfront condos will save us all. And
like the poor people it'll all just filter up, right? We get get rich enough people in the rich spots, and then there'll be more spots for the poor people, and then
and that just didn't happen.
So you kind of touched on it, but I've heard a lot of people say that Winnipeg is a developer's kind of town. That a lot of these mega projects are being pushed forward by specific interests, and not to overly disparage True North, but I mean I believe they're working on something now, but part of the deal with them getting the land and being able to build getting some of the money to build the new True North Square was to have affordable housing. And I mean, you look at the place, and it's what people who work in affordable housing and social housing and that kind of thing understand as affordable housing is something that's quite different than I think what a developer builds as affordable housing. So yeah, I'm curious, sort of what your take on that is.
Years ago, probably 20 years ago, and I still use this quote when I talk about it. It was Dan Lett in the Winnipeg Free Press wrote in a story that, and this might have even been 30 years ago, I don't know, but it was
yeah, time flies.
When it comes to development, Winnipeg is a cheap, desperate date. And that's kind of how, if a developer comes to town and kind of makes makes a pass at us, we'll roll over and whatever you want. And that, Portage Main was like that. Portage Place was like, it's like whatever you want, do it. We'll give you whatever you need. And we don't have that ability. And even with the current development, you mentioned True North, that was that was part of the deal. Was that you would have a certain percentage of affordable suites. Yeah. And at the last minute, they backed out. And, they paid a penalty for it or whatever.
Yeah, which is really not compensation.
And at the end of the day, no new houses. Exactly. At the end of the day, there were no new houses.
Yeah.
And, again, like I said, going back to, Portage and Main, Trizac development times up to current day, if a developer, we're just scared to say to a that, no, you know what, we're going to pull your permits until you either put those in or, you can build a whole building.
Yeah,
for it or something, and it's unfortunate that that we've been that way, and it's probably caused a lot of problems. A lot of standalone projects that we just hope will make it, and we don't want to bother the developer because it's going to be such a great project, and so nobody else gets kind of the benefits other than the developer and the people that can afford to live there or operate a business in there. Right, it doesn't spill over very much.
Yeah, we sort of contain our successes. We're not really, well, not all of us are in the sharing mood all the time. And yeah, one of the things that I am looking for and trying to support in communities is finding developers who are have a little bit of a social heart and are trying to build things, and these are the ones who have the hardest times trying to get actual building done. And so I mean, are we stuck like that?
I think it's hard. I mean, we don't have a lot of the big multi-million-dollar developments that come in. I mean, it's somebody from Toronto, it's somebody from out of town, right? So they don't have. So I'm hoping, going back to say True North, when we're looking at them possibly, I'm interested to see what they're going to come up with their proposal for Portage Place. Mm-hmm. They seem to have taken some of the what community groups are saying that there has to be a community component to this. This can't just be. Yeah. They've signed a deal with the chiefs who own the Bay building.
Oh, okay.
A co-development, and kind of realizing that this is a whole.
Yeah, it's an ecosystem.
We can't just, exactly. We can't just
building,
redevelop
right?
this and they redevelop that. Like we all got to be kind of working together. So I'm kind of hoping that after True North Square, that maybe they'll because they are local.
Yeah.
And if they maybe learned a lesson from True North Square, they have a good track record of getting stuff done. Which is even when you do get out of town developers. How many projects have?
Oh my goodness!
Fence has gone up, and 5 years later, the lot's still empty, and then the fences come down, and it was like, oh, well, wasn't there something supposed to be there? So.
Yeah, it looked like it looked like there was plans.
Yeah, I think there needs. I just don't think we have a big enough, development community. That we're a pretty small town, right? We don't churn out multi-million-dollar developments every day.
Yeah.
And you need somebody local to really kind of know who some of those, social groups are, or different needs of a neighborhood when you're redeveloping something.
Yeah.
And I wish there were more that tried to take that into account. But again, that's in a way not their business, right? Their business is to fill is to fill that square block with as much money making property as they possibly can. So they'll get away, they'll try to get away with what they can get away with. So you also need the government in there.
Right.
To kind of say, again, like with the True North, say, no, that's actually, you're not going to back out of that social housing part of it, the affordable housing part of it, and stand firm.
Yeah.
Right. And if they want to build that development, then they got to play ball. So, and we've not done a great job with that, and it's too bad because I think we need that mix of private and public. Like I think of two streets when I think of different kind of retail streets in Winnipeg, and one of them is Selkirk Avenue, and the other is Sherbrooke Street, kind of that West Broadway portion of Sherbrooke Street. And Selkirk is one of those places where it's only government. Every 10 years, a big cargo helicopter full of tunes, flies in and they drop money. Starting in the 80s, there's Core Area 1 and Core Area 2. In 92, there was the Winnipeg Development Agreement. Then they built that U of M continuing education part there. And, but still 10 years out, it's a constant. They've not had a buy-in from the private sector to say, oh yeah, you know what, I'll build something, or I'll buy this commercial building and fix it into something. And it just ends up being a street full of social services and no retail.
Right.
And if you look at, say, Sherbrooke Street, and I lived there just after it hit rock bottom in the Gangside days and the Murders Half Acre Day in the 1990s. And it had some government input, like the Lions Housing Project. So Lions got involved in fixing up a lot of the houses. The Assiniboine Credit Union stepped in with some money. There was some government money. The West Broadway Development Organization is a government-funded thing. But there was a mix of also building owners who lived in there. Said, well, you know what? I'll spend six figures and fix up my apartment if it looks like some of this housing is improving around here.
Right.
And people bought, commercial, or who had long time owned commercial buildings, kind of fix them up and put that money into them. And now news that the Sherbrooke Inn has been sold and maybe redeveloped. Yeah.
Okay.
So there was I think a good example of there was government money, but you also have to have the buy-in from people that'll say, I'll fix up my building, or whether it be a commercial building or a residential building. And they seem to have come up with a pretty good mix. Yes, some people can't afford the rent in some of those buildings anymore, but I think West Broadway has kind of kept a pretty good mix of people who are lower income and higher income, and students, and that mix that I kind of remember when I lived there. And so I think that so it's disparaging, I think, private development. You do need that money. If that money doesn't follow the government money, it's just, you're gonna 10 years later, you're just gonna have to put more government money into it, and you get a pretty dysfunctional neighborhood out of it.
Right.
And so it's finding that right balance, and we just don't often ever find that right balance in Winnipeg. I'm not exactly sure why.
Yeah, well, that is that is the grand question. Okay, so so we've talked a little bit about what goes on in the city and what some of our issues are. So I'm coming at this from a government angle. Mm-hmm. So I, as a candidate for the by-election coming up, what can I advocate for from the government to improve that connection? Like, do they does the housing activism community need to do something special to change that, or is it are we ready for that kind of change?
Well, I think a positive thing with housing is that in recent years, a lot more nonprofits have gotten into the housing game. It used to be places like Westminster Housing Society and some of these long-term groups, but you look at the Peace Tower housing project in Chinatown. That's a refugee housing, a couple of refugee immigration new immigrant housing projects. Larger ones have gone up kind of in the inner city. And you look at the West Central Women's Resource Center, took over a double-barreled 3-story walk-up building that was sitting empty on Victor Street for years and years and years. And that's something I see as positive, government working with a nonprofit. Because you'd like to think that Manitoba Housing, which was getting rid of housing units under the last government, would up its game. But you know what? It's not always government. People don't want to live necessarily in government housing, and there are a lot of segments of our population who would, I think, have a historic problem with that. Right? You don't want to go living in the man's house. And, answering his questions and stuff. So I think I think kind of there's no one size fits all, and to have the capability of and flexibility of working on kind of smaller projects with nonprofit organizations to convert things. Like I read, maybe it was 6 months ago, that the McLaren Hotel may become a housing project and stuff, just a single room occupancy hotel, and that sort of thing. And that is something that yes, it needs more money, but I think also that willingness to kind of work with nonprofit groups that haven't done housing before and say, hey, mental, resource assistance for youth or something like that.
Yeah,
and saying, hey, you know what? Why, if you want to buy an apartment block, we'll be there. We'll partner with you to make that work, and have maybe Manitoba Housing on that side of it, then building places of their own. But, so I mean, that's something encouraging that I saw. I used to do community housing for a number of years, and that was always something I saw as kind of a big positive. Like it or not, the days of Manitoba Housing building a 20-story tower of units to house people in, that's probably not going to come back. But if they can take the money they would have spent on that, I think you get better value if you can divide it amongst a bunch of groups that will have smaller scale housing projects. And that will suit the clientele that they work or that are based in the neighborhoods where these housing units are going to be.
I find that's one of my problems with suburban sprawl and the sort of McMansion and cookie cutter homes is that one, blah, but two, it doesn't really take into account the neighborhood, the kind of people that are going to live there. It's it's price point stuff, like how can we make this worth this much, and usually leaves out all the stuff like, hey, close to bus stop, do you have is it accessible, is it is there opportunity to say subdivide or granny suites. And I know that's something that that I guess the city is working on now, because the federal government has told them that if they want housing money that they're going to have to start changing bylaws. Is that how we have to hold the city accountable? Get our other levels of government to put funding stipulation actions on there, like we.
Well, it's funny because Winnipeg always has a housing issue, in that when I did community housing, there was like one guy who was the housing guy for the city. And places like Regina have like 14 people to work in their housing department, or 20 people to work in their housing department. And for us, what it was is the feds transfer the money to the province, and it depends on the province. Some of the provinces flow that money through to individual cities. Manitoba doesn't. Manitoba keeps the money.
Oh, okay.
And it deals with housing, whether it be in Winnipeg or the PAW or whatever. And that was always an issue, is the city doesn't really have a lot of tools other than zoning to really bring to the table. It doesn't have money to build housing because it doesn't get any of the housing money. And that was always an issue when we met with we'd be like, oh, city has to do this, city has to do that. And the guy would be like, look, it's me. It's me. Like, there's one guy, and my budget's, whatever it was, $1 million a year. And he goes, well, I'm not going to, you can't build any housing for that. And I think, so I think the relationship with the province and how that money gets there. I've always had a problem with provinces. I always think
prefer states or?
Cities are where, cities elect governments. Cities know what the city problems are. Flow that money. Like back when Glenn Murray was mayor, he was talking about we need 2% of the GSTs to be given to municipalities.
Right.
I always thought that was, or PST. And I always thought that was a great idea, because who knows that municipality better than the elected officials of that municipality?
Right.
Why is the provincial government keeping it all for its, and then doling it out?
And trying to centralize it, and
and then you get weird things like the province fund. You read about a community center being built in the south part of the city, and it's like, well, the province funded it. It's like, why is the province funding it? That's a city issue. The city has a network of community centers. Why in the world is the province coming in and having a say in that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's one thing for the province to say we have community center building funding. Right? We have a category for this, and if you
we'll give it to the city if they want.
And it's your money if you meet these criteria. If you're providing, we're into carbon tax talk in the campaign, and there's is there a carbon credit system that you can help subsidize upgrades to energy efficient appliances, making sure that kind of stuff is in, making sure that. For me as a builder, making sure that the houses are just well built, proper inspections. And, things may have changed in the city since I used to get the homes that I was building inspected, but I've had inspectors come and say, hey, does this pass to me? And, like you're saying, there's one guy doing housing, and there's probably just not enough people and not enough training to do the housing.
And there just isn't a housing department at the city,
which is
don't
nuts.
Get that money.
And
and it depends on other cities, and I think it tends to be provinces, and that's one. We've always had the issue that we're the biggest city in Manitoba.
Yeah.
Right. Whereas other jurisdictions, you get Regina, Saskatoon, or Calgary, Edmonton, or in Ontario, where you get a bunch of cities around the same size.
There's at least some kind of disparity,
you would just give the money to the cities, let them do their thing.
Yeah.
But here it's one city.
Yeah.
And I don't. Yeah.
I mean, don't tell Brandon and Portage that. But
no, but for size-wise,
in terms of and amenities. In Canada, you kind of need a hockey team to that's a map putter honor.
Yeah. But I think the relationship and how the money gets doled out, I think, could be done much differently. I think the city probably has better tools to deal with city housing issues rather than the province kind of thinking, okay, what's best for the entire province?
Yeah, and because you'll never have that answer, right?
Yeah,
and there is no what's best for the entire province. Our latitude is pretty vast. We go from. From the border with the States to the border with Northwest Territories, that's a whole set of countries in Europe, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. No, I think part of it is the relationship between the governments and how the money gets doled out. I think part of it is getting nonprofits and other organizations involved, maybe in cooperation with developers, maybe in cooperation with governments, but I think they're better at delivering housing. And I think another thing, too, is some projects can be really small. When I started doing housing development, the province used to give a bunch of organizations in the city, neighborhood renewal corporations. I can't remember what the amount of money was for, but it allowed us to give up to, I think it was $2,500 in housing repair grants.
Right.
And a little more if it was a duplex, and a little more. And unfortunately, the last government cut that. It cut it had a program for that. It had an emergency housing program, so if the furnace blew in the middle of winter and they didn't have the money to replace it. They had one for seniors could apply for it to make their houses more accessible.
Yeah.
And they cut. It was a whole suite of programs, and they just cut them all out. All one day, they just all disappeared. And I always thought, and after that we got a little bit of city money where we could give $1,000 grants, but if you could give people access to $2,000, $5,000 grants, that can do two things. One, that can save a house. That can save an old house like in Elmwood or or in the West End
Yeah.
that just needs major roof repair, or
Yeah.
the chimney's going to fall over. Or
Public safety stuff.
or redo the windows or whatever. I mean, we would give out little bits of money.
Yeah.
And people would say, "My God, you saved."
How
my
effective
house
is
would
this? Yeah.
Collapsed if I couldn't repair that porch.
Yeah.
And I couldn't afford to without that money.
Yeah.
I think it also keeps people in their houses longer.
Yeah.
Why have them fighting over seniors' home spaces or Manitoba housing if, hey, you know what, for $5,000, if that person can build a ramp on the front of their house and maybe lower the step to get into the house and widen one of the doorways from the living room into the kitchen.
Yeah.
If that lets them stay in the house for 5 years longer, that's a win for everybody.
Yeah, that's the cheapest care that you can provide, right?
Yeah. So even though it is a $100 million problem on one side or $1 billion problem, it's also a $5,000 at a time problem in some of these older neighborhoods that just have that older housing stock that people want to stay in their houses, but eventually it gets.
They're rooted in their communities, like that's.
Yeah, they want to stay in their community for as long as they can, and sometimes it's a small grant that can head off a bigger problem down the road that they'll just have to move because we didn't fix the roof repair,
or it gets sold down to
later,
a developer who then turns it into housing that's not of community fit anymore.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, no, exactly. So I think I think that Elmwood is one of those interesting neighborhoods that has pretty old housing stock for the most part. It has those kind of weird industrial areas stuck here and there, or you get the residential street with suddenly a little industrial block in the middle of it, which is kind of like the West End has those too. And so I think you could do a lot of housing in Elmwood, $5,000 at a time, not just say. I've always wondered about Nairn, the south side of Nairn, that it's like, God, that's underused land, and that used to be like Pembina Highway. Right, where it was all like fast food joints, and you kind of think, this is Pembina Highway. Why is it all like fast food joints with a big parking lot around it? I imagine that'll come to Nairn.
Well,
all that's change on Pembina Highway, where a lot of those are being knocked down and apartment block going up.
Yeah, I mean, we can talk about the development problems in down Pembina too. I mean, that's a little bit of water and waste, and a little bit of roads, and I don't know. For anyone who's trying to figure out what I'm talking about, it's the I believe it was last year the bunch of developers were complaining because they couldn't get their permit, or they couldn't proceed with their buildings because someone realized that the sewer system that is in place can't accommodate high-rise structures, and downstream consequences. That's why we have algal blooms in Lake Winnipeg, because bless us for trying to make this sewage treatment plant, but every time it rains and the overflow pushes all of that out into the Red River anyways, and it just bypasses the plant, and that's sort of our problem, right? Like, we're trying to build things in places where it's maybe not best for them to be built, and not that high rises should be built in Elmwood, but it's an old housing stock, but it's under capacity. It's because when a lot of that land was settled, right, it was a lot of farm families, bigger families, multiple families in these same houses, and now it's one family of like a few people. So the infrastructure that was put in there, the plumbing and all that, it was made for having like a more substantial population. So there's actually opportunity now to build more density in that, because we don't have to upgrade huge sections of our sewage system, because it's already there. It's already being underutilized, and we're just kind of filling up to capacity. So yeah, I mean, I think Elmwood is like a really great opportunity for that kind of development.
And I think for other things, the one thing that does strike me about Elmwood too is, and so Elmwood joined City of Winnipeg in 1906, and it voted. It was like 604 and 28 against joining because they were pressed up against Winnipeg, but they wanted all the stuff Winnipeg had. They wanted public transportation. They wanted police department and fire department, and kind of realized, you know what, we can do two things. We can try to do it ourselves and spend a lot of money, or we can just join Winnipeg. And they actually joined Winnipeg. And it was after that. So that's how the Redwood Bridge came about. That was kind of a gift.
Oh, okay. That was that was the Peace Bridge.
That was the Peace Bridge for saying, thank you for joining us. Here's a bridge. And I assume the rebuilding of the Louise Bridge. Because Redwood opened, I think the vote took place in 1906. The Redwood opened in 1909, and then the new Louise Bridge, 1910. And something that's always kind of struck me about Elmwood is that over time, Elmwood itself kind of lost itself as a municipality, and it kind of became a through street to get to other places, right? So you have Talbot, you have Nairn, you have Henderson, like you have some pretty heavy duty streets, and it's I mean, you know, and we're not talking like right in the heart of residential Elmwood, but there's a lot of streets there that are super busy.
Yeah, I mean, they could be the heart of residential Elmwood, right?
Yeah, well, and I guess there are some, Gray and places like people are just using it to whiz through to get from downtown to East Kildonan, North Kildonan, East St. Paul, or whatever. Or they're going the opposite way, they're going to Transcona.
Yeah.
And so when I look at, say, those two bridges, right, those two bridges have to get, you know, rebuilt pretty soon.
Yeah, they've been in the news for...
And there's just, you know, hopefully... You know, when you're talking about the sewer not being able to keep up, I mean, hopefully they have a bigger plan and kind of say, okay, how can we incorporate like walkability or active transportation? So if we can build the new Louise Bridge, what's going to come off it? Is it going to be this little tiny 3-foot wide sidewalk that you have to turn sideways when you meet somebody when you go across, or hey, are we going to have and can that active transportation path maybe continue down Nairn? I'm not sure what you do when you get to the Nairn overpass, but you know, thought those bigger kind of things. So they're talking about building bridges, but they're looking at the tiny, where the bridge starts, where the bridge ends. Yeah, and there's just so many traffic is so many big, huge streets in Elmwood that it's like, wow, here's your time to kind of think, okay, how are we going to fit this bridge into, you know, a bigger, more manageable.
What's the context for this bridge? And who is it really serving? You know, is it just for industrial traffic to get from here to there, or do we want to be able to enjoy?
And have people bike from downtown into Elmwood, that type of thing. Because I imagine the Louise, I know for the Arlington, which is closer to where I live, you know, they were looking at doing, you know, double the lanes. Yeah. Right. So for the Louise, there's gonna be a lot of spillover. There's going to be a lot of probably property bought up and things like that to make turning. So you got double the bridge means you got double the lanes and double the turning lanes when you get on or off the bridge. Yeah. And it's you know, going back to what you were saying about trying to fit development into you know, making sure the sewer system works, you know, for the type of buildings that you're promoting.
The basic utilities and build for growth. Like I had a relative who was working at a newly built school in a newly developed community, and the school was built for the capacity that it was for the number of houses that were built currently. Okay, yeah. And there were like 2 or 3 other fields that were still going to get developed with housing, and the school is already at capacity. And you know, there's like it's some school board. Some administration person who was maybe thinking they're doing a good job to get their project in under budget, and you know, making sure that they've spent. But if we're not spending the money for our growth, then what are you going to do as soon as, and like we're talking like years away from that being an immediate overcrowding problem in your school.
Yeah, and that was always a big thing. I mean, I think we're growing faster than this now, but for so many years, and this was a big knock about, you know, say some of the downtown development, some of the suburban development, was that from World War II, or maybe even before World War II, you know, right up until the 70s, Winnipeg was growing at about 1 or 1.5% a year. You know, it was a slow, steady growth, and a lot of people, I guess, in retrospect, you know, look back and said, that should have been a blessing. Like, that should have been a way to say, we know how much the city's going to grow. Yeah. So 20 years from now, so if we build this now, 20 years from now, it'll probably look like this, or if we're going to build a bridge in 20 years, we're going to need to start expropriating this land, or if we want Pembina Highway to be more high use in terms of, the buildings that are there, we're going to need to put the sewer system in. And that was always, when I took a couple of urban studies courses at the university, and that was one of the things that was always pointed out was that, man, unlike, say, Calgary or Toronto or places where people just head to and you can't really plan for that. We had a perfect, we knew what
we had the prairie view, right? We could see the horizon.
We knew 40 years down the road probably what things were going to look like, and we never really quite took advantage of that. And we kind of squandered that opportunity.
Yeah, that squandering opportunities, I feel like, is something that we do. But I think that there are a lot of organizations and like you're saying, community organizations now that are getting involved in that. One, I would like to shout out to Glen Elm Neighborhood Association and Reimagine Elmwood, who is taking that idea of people just zipping through their communities at, some would say too high a speed. I would say too high a speed most of the time. And are doing things, working with the city to, take space at times, different things to
absolutely,
to beautify it. And so, I think that there is a strong component of having really strong community organizations. And, can you convince a government to fund the organization that's going to sort of tell them what to do? Like, that is a problem. The city doesn't, and actually, even if you look in the news over the last 2 or 3 months, the city wants to cut the funding to the arts program. Oh my goodness!
Arts and environmental organizations, and and they're all groups that it's not a lie. I think the maximum you can get from that operating grant fund is something like $20,000 a year. So for a lot of these groups, it's really keep the lights on. Like this isn't paying people to
no one's getting rich off it.
No,
right?
and I've heard, because through my day job I sometimes go to city council meetings and sit through different presentations, and and for a lot of these there it'll be a trail association in Transcona that maintains the series of trails and parks, and it's like, so what, you're going to not give them the money so that you can pay a city employee or a team of city employees to have to do the same thing, or you're not going to do it. Nobody's going to groom.
Yeah, you're going to let it.
And you're just going to let the park go to pot. And it's like, well, for for $20,000, $30,000
for the pennies on the
it doesn't make a lot of sense. And they're the few groups that the city, that like neighborhood associations. I don't think any neighborhood, like resident grassroots, I don't think many of them get money from, say, the city.
No.
And it is, back in the day, back when Unicity started in Winnipeg. So in 1972, there was the old city of Winnipeg. It merged with the 12 other municipalities around it. So St. James, St. Boniface, East Goldona, North Goldona, West Goldona, and St. Vital, and they all got merged into one big city.
Yeah.
And when they did that, you would have a community committee, which they still have the community committee. They're kind of monstrous size now. But back in the day, they had, I think, when the first city council after 1972, I think there were like 50 people on it. So it was a huge. Anyways, you had them divided into community committees.
Yeah.
And then you'd have East Goldona, Transcona, that type of thing. And every community committee had what was called a RAG, a Residents Advisory Group.
Okay.
That was part of it. And it was kind of almost meant to be like a little kind of an opposition group, kind of a group that would, I don't think they were funded. I don't know if RAG members got paid anything, but it was written into the legislation that each you would have community committees made up of 12 city councilors for that district, plus you would have a residents advisory group.
Okay.
And I'm not quite sure how they got appointed or if they volunteered or whatever.
Yeah.
But those were to be kind of they were the ones that would help, make sure read the legislation, make sure nothing slipped through, that type of thing. And it's like, hey, wait, we have a question about this.
Yeah.
And the city did away with those. I don't remember, like in the 90s or something like that. And somebody told me that one of the reasons why was you had opposition.
Yeah.
And you had people that could run for your job. right? So you had oftentimes people who are at the head of the rag would run against the city councilor after a little. I would become the city councilor.
Yeah.
So it's.
I mean, that sounds like a really good political system to me. I mean,
it was. It was. And places from California and there was all sorts of places studied how Unicity worked, and that was supposed to be a real addition to democracy.
Yeah.
That you also had a kind of a built-in opposition.
Yeah.
Not that they were like the opposition that their mandate was to oppose.
No.
But that you also had a group of community members that would also have have some skin in the game and be watching things that were happening at the community committee level.
Yeah, I mean that is something like the process of now trying to bring that to City Hall and applying to speak and it's while one, I mean, I don't think it's really that accessible. Like, I mean, to make an impact with city council and to really be able to engage the idea, I think is while I'll say I saw it during the last session where they were talking about the arts funding cuts and the Kenaston expansion. And I mean, it doesn't feel like we've really had a really strong public discussion about what that is, and I can understand for the people who have approved it why that might be, because I don't think it's a good way to spend our money.
I encourage everybody who's listening to go to a community committee meeting and go to a council meeting. You can also watch them online, but that's kind of cheating.
Yeah.
And it's really boring online. At least when you're sitting there in person, you have to stay awake and pay attention. But go. Next time you hear something that's I wonder how that, or they're doing something with this park, show up at the meeting.
Yeah.
Take your lunch break late and go sit at the meeting.
Yeah.
And
I mean, so as an aside, I think that should be like a citizen's right. And in Brazil, that your employer has to have a TV in your place of employment if the national soccer team is playing.
Oh, okay.
If City Hall is sitting, I don't want to say that, your community project is less or more important than the Brazilian national team, especially not to any Brazilians.
Yeah.
But, why is that not something that we have access to?
We need to teach, I think, Civics 101, how City Hall works. And I've worked for city councilors in the past, and I worked for 10 years at a neighborhood organization, and very few people understand how the actual mechanics of City Hall work. And I think that because then you're not going to be able to go to the right things or apply. And it's if you're just yelling at the wind because you don't know who to yell at.
Right.
You're not going to get anywhere. So I always encourage people to if there's something coming up, actually go down and sit and listen and watch the meeting. And community committee meetings are great because they cover the waterfront, right? So you'll have park stuff that'll come up, and you'll have rezoning things that'll come up, and you'll have street repair stuff that'll come up.
Yeah.
And it's you're not kind of locked into, if one topic bores you, you're kind of it'll get to places. But I always say to people, but those are during the day now. They used to be in the evening. They used to have those meetings, and even city council meetings at one time were
really.
Yeah, and unfortunately, it's hard to get to, but I think so. When you talk, when you talk about places like Glen Elm, and there are some neighborhoods that have awesome, really kind of high functioning community organizations. Good for them. There's so many neighborhoods though that don't.
Yeah.
And that's always kind of my concern. Even with what my organization is doing this year is we're trying to work with community groups, maybe in high rental areas, low income areas where you don't really have a neighborhood association,
right,
to plant trees at schools and places like that. And that's something that always gets left out. There's a lot of neighborhoods that just don't have that. Or sometimes for these neighborhood groups, it's one or two key people.
Right.
How many times have you seen a group that it was this wonderful organization that was doing all sorts of stuff, and then Mary retired and Joe moved to BC.
Yeah.
And then suddenly it disappeared and you never hear from them again. And So great, great that there are groups that do that, and it would be great if there was also help for, like I said, a lot of neighborhoods just don't have that. Just like I said, they don't have the skills, or they don't.
Yeah.
They don't have the types of jobs where they can I'll take some time off and go.
Yeah,
go
right.
look at this or that, and.
Yeah, or the spare energy. I mean, for families, so much that that we could be doing for families, and that it's hard to advocate for if you're not, what thing can you make if you got a toddler and and a little kid, and you're trying to run a household as a family? There's not a whole lot left over for political engagement, and those are the people who are probably most effective and most deserve.
They would use the most services in the community.
Absolutely.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, it's sometimes the neighborhoods that need it most just don't have that ability. People maybe are living hand to mouth. Have other social problems in their neighborhood that as much as fixing up the local park would be great.
Yeah,
and I think the problem with, I was saying before, there were 50 or 52 city councilors.
Yeah.
That was kind of part of that idea with Unicity, is that you would have kind of micro councilors. So a councilor, and they were part-time jobs back then, but a councilor would know every square centimeter of their neighborhood because it was only a few blocks, right? It was
it's their their walk on the way to their office.
Exactly. So you could have call your city councilor and have a complaint about a fence, and he'd drive by on his way home and look at it. And so you could look at part, but now these wards are so huge.
Yeah.
They're massive. That's hard, and city councilors don't. God, I sound like I'm really used to city councilors here, but city council doesn't get the money that say MLAs do. Like if you're an MLA,
right.
You get a staff, you get at least one, I think, ledge assistant, you get one constituency assistant paid for.
Yeah.
You get money to have a constituency office in the neighborhood, and usually you can pool because you're usually with a party, so you can there's other pool staff there. Whereas a city councilor, last time I worked for one, you have an assistant, and I think they're full time now. When I was there, it was part time.
Yeah,
and you had an office at City Hall, and I remember we used to share subscriptions to the Free Press. It was every 4 councilors got a subscription to the newspaper.
Each one gets a section. You just
rotate. And it was just, there was no money to do anything, and maybe it's a little better now. I understand that the executive assistants are kind of full time, but still, compared to the amount of issues that they're looking at, say, compared to they should at least get what an MLA gets. Like they should have an office in the constituency.
If you want them to be as functional,
with a staff member that's there to intake questions and look after stuff, and then have somebody at City Hall for the more legislative stuff. Because there's more MLAs in Winnipeg than there are city councilors.
Yeah, which is kind of bizarre.
Yeah,
right?
It strikes me as kind of odd. So so that would be one of the things for civic engagement that I would say too, is that you either gotta and I understand every year everybody likes the fewer councilors the better. If they could get it down to 5, some people would be happy. But then you don't know your neighbor. You don't know your neighborhood. And if you do that, then you need the staff to be able to kind of look after those things for you, and they have neither. They're kind of stuck in the middle. They have wards that I think are too big to really know on that intimate level, and they have no staff, so that if a community group says, I want to meet my councilor, well, you have to meet the councilor. You're going to be waiting for weeks. Because, when council's in session, they're... So I always kind of think it's the worst of both worlds at the city level, considering how important city stuff is to your everyday life. If they shut down a wading pool, that affects you the next day.
Yeah.
If they put up a traffic light, that affects you the next day.
Yeah.
And not to dump on the problem, but usually provincial or federal stuff over time deals with you, right? But the immediate stuff that City Hall needs, and you don't really have offices that can deal with stuff immediately.
Yeah. Well, so yeah, that's maybe a connecting point for some of the stuff that I'm seeing in the bike community now. There's been a number of accidents this year, and I mean, I think the first thing that I always hear is that improper signage, improper design. Like these are cyclists who are obeying the law, who are still getting hit because intersections are not made to be navigated properly. I mean, we have these problems as pedestrians too. Like you say, walking through downtown, or walking through even some residential streets. Like I've had people in Glenelm complain to me about some of the rich people on Kildonan Drive who get their nice 30-kilometer-an-hour Kildonan Drive and then are driving 60 kilometers to get to Henderson through. It's difficult, but there are like, I mean, very cheap ways to do it where you can change the signage, you can enforce it and put in in 30-kilometer zones, put some speed calming infrastructure in, which again saves our streets too. I mean, big issue with the soil and the streets that we build is that we drive too heavy and too fast over them.
I find, I think a better job has to be done. I mean, I cycle the odd time, but I'm mostly a walker or a car driver. And even the other day, I had an issue when I was coming onto Broadway from Fort, and they have this weird turn. They have 3 traffic lights.
Yeah.
And one of the lights was red, and 2 were green. And I thought, okay, well, I don't even know what that means. So I went ahead, and there was a lady coming up the bike path. So I guess the red light was for me to let her go past, but it didn't say,
and the
bike lane. And
that's a big one. Is like right turns on reds in cycling lanes is a big causer of accidents.
Yeah, and I was like, what? And I mean, she kind of yelled at me, which she had every right to. And she was like, look at the light. Your light is red. And it's like, well, I didn't know each lane had a light.
Yeah,
it was just there was a green light and a red, and there was nothing around it saying, or kind of maybe explaining that, there's 10 seconds for the bike. The bike lane is given 10 seconds to clear
signage
before you go.
You can,
and it's an awful hodgepodge of stuff. That I think that they've not. I mean, eventually it'll get stitched together. I think these things take time. Back in the 1880s, we had a cycle path.
Really?
So last I think up until the 20s. I haven't read up. I wrote about it some time ago on a blog, but if you Google Cycle Paths Association, it was Fred Drury, who was one of him and Edward owned the Redwood Brewery.
Oh, okay.
Tying back into Redwoods. We're tying up some more. And he was a big advocate of cycling and thought that for everybody, regardless of like race or class or whatever, everybody should be able to hop on a bike to get to where they need to go. And he started out this system, and for 20-something years, they just kept adding paths. They would have lighting on them. They even had little policemen that would regard. And how they funded it was bicycle licenses.
Oh, really?
So bicycle licenses money would go into solving it, and they had a fairly good network. And then I'm not quite sure what happened. Like, it's been a long time since I wrote it, but it was kind of in the 20s. I think it just started kind of falling apart. There was much more street traffic, with cars.
We started getting over
and stuff like that. And I think they just needed those wider,
well, we say need. I mean,
but they wanted them. So I can't remember, but we had it. So actually, it is kind of funny when they talk about, the street. The bike network. It's like, God, we had that. We had that. If we would have just stuck with it, would have been completely incorporated into our city system right now. Like, it wouldn't even be a thought if Fred Drury had his way. But
I mean, I feel that a little bit about the trolley system. Like that we used to have this really great public transport infrastructure. That we used to have trains that went out to Grand Beach. And Victoria Beach, and like you could just get into the station in the city downtown, and hop a train and be at the beach. And how much of a destination was the beach for everyone? Yeah.
There isn't even an inner city bus. I mean, the Winnipeg streetcars used to go out to Selkirk.
Yeah.
Used to go out Main Street and then up Eveline right into the heart of downtown Selkirk.
Yeah. I mean, we big cities talk about their bullet trains to everywhere. Just a nice, relaxing trolley ride. Like that's the golden age. I'm maybe too young to call that the golden age, but I mean, like I've maybe it's nostalgia for something that I'm like misconstruing, but like that seems like such a great way. Like it's classy and civilized and.
I know. I think it was. I mean, it was. You'd still need your bus service to be like feeders into the system, but for your main lines, I think it was a good system. They just by the time the city took over transit in 1954 or something like that. Prior to that, like streetcar services was always a private company.
Oh, okay.
So they were given license by the city to do the streetcar. So there was constant fight between streetcar owners, streetcar company owner, and the city, because the city constantly wanted more routes. The streetcar, it was really expensive to put in the ground.
Right.
Not expensive over time because you made that
money
back.
Once it's in
but
there.
But initially,
they
were like, well, we're not paying $1 million to extend.
This part,
a kilometer. No. But the city would be like, no, you have to accept. We want to subdivide the streets down there, and. It was one. And then when the city took over, the system had been neglected for a long time, and rather than investing in it, the city thought, you know what, buses.
Yeah.
Like every other city, not every other city, but like a lot of other cities, the easy way out was just buy a bunch of buses, and they can go anywhere you want them to.
Yeah.
They don't need the tracks. They don't need the infrastructure, and it was disappointing, especially here where we have the long. Straight streets.
Yeah.
Where you have, we have a lot of squiggly streets. We're not as well laid out as, say, some of the railway created towns, but still, you got Main Street.
And you have some of those spaces to negotiate, right? Those are your kind of cool Winnipeg unique kind of spaces, right? Confusion Corner. These like sort of missing spaces where you're intersecting and you're not, there's like. It could be a really great place for development, or like a stopping spot for, services or commercials. You could make a lot of use out of it, and you could make it really Winnipeg. I feel, but
and now when they talk about the bus rapid transit and stuff. So I've always found like an expression I always use is like no news is new news. It's like basically if something comes up, you know what, it's come up before. It's we've had cycle paths before.
Yeah,
we've had bus rapid transit, except there were streetcars.
Right.
And a lot like back when, remember Uber came in and there was the big fight between the taxi cabs and Uber and protests.
Yeah.
The exact same thing happened in like 1920s when jitney operators, who were like the Uber of their time, came in. They had protests. They were driving around City Hall. The cab drivers refused service, and so it's part of one of the things I enjoy kind of about history is sometimes something comes up and people are setting their hair on fire saying, this is like and it's like, we've had that a couple of times before. In the past, this is we just never learned our lesson, or I find we're very isolated too. That's one of the things I think is unfortunate for Winnipeg, whether it be bike lanes or rapid transit or anything like that, is a lot of other cities. You have another city nearby where you can compare yourself to, right? Like if you're in Edmonton, you can go up to Calgary.
Yeah.
You can say, look how Calgary does it.
Yeah, and there's a little bit of a library aspect, so that there's like a civic engagement to be motivated, so that we're not falling behind Calgary. Yeah,
or just see, hey, they experimented with this. Let's go up there and see see how that worked out. You get that in Vancouver and some of its suburbs, or Victoria and Regina, Saskatoon. Toronto, Hamilton, Toronto, Ottawa, Montreal, Quebec. But we don't have that.
Yeah.
We don't have a similar size city anywhere near us. And I think that's all, and maybe, I don't know, I could be corrected on this. I mean, maybe that makes us more creative in some ways, but, we don't have that city. So everybody, you go online, everybody's setting their hair on fire, running up and down the aisle of the airplane saying, the plane's going down, the plane's going down. And it's like, Every city has that issue.
Yeah.
Look at what other cities have done. It's just, the media, it's a Winnipeg media. Winnipeg media is not going to send somebody,
to cover that
for an 8-hour drive to another city to say, oh, what's this city doing?
Yeah.
And whereas you could if it was an Edmonton Calgary situation.
Yeah.
So the media doesn't cover it. We get mad. We're very cheap. So like the folks who went down to Houston to see what they did with their homelessness situation.
Yes.
Everybody was mad, and it's like, but that's how you want to go and see what other jurisdictions have done.
And you have to walk through it and be there and get the details.
So we never see what other cities' problems are or how they tried to solve them, kind of in relation to ours. Like you can read. Yeah,
it's a Winnipeg
context. You can read newspaper from
like,
Vancouver, but really you don't get like the media here doing the comparison, or you don't get officials here necessarily going a lot to these other cities. And I think that's made us very isolated. Makes us panic, I think, a lot more that something's a bigger problem than it might be, and that what, there is a solution out there.
Yeah,
you just have to go. You have to go to some of these other cities, and unfortunately for Winnipeggers, when we travel, we don't really travel to other Canadian cities, right?
We're going to Mexico.
South. Exactly. We go south and we come back, and so you have no clue how recycling or bike lanes or anything happens in Edmonton.
Even just what could be, right? I mean,
exactly.
I was in Vancouver a while ago.
Is it worse? Is it
no recycling bins? Why? Because people pick them up and they have a recycling cash for recycling program, and it is so clean. It is so clean that way.
Interesting. See, little
things,
that.
Right? Because I was there. I had my soda pop, and I was looking around. I'm like, where do I put this? Where do I recycle? How am I in Vancouver and there's not like a recycling, but they're like, no, just put it on the ground or on a table, and someone will pick it up, and like 5 minutes later, it's gone.
That's not a bad idea. That's actually a really good idea. But I think our elected officials, our isolation has meant that our elected officials and our media don't get out, which I think, and people don't necessarily get out to the Canadian city. And I think all that mushes together to make it just such a, so whether you want to do something great like a better cycle network or something with recycling or something with, it's always a slog because people just assume that, oh, this is our problem and our problem only, and we've created it and we're not, whereas, gosh, there are things that people probably visit us to see how we did something better than what their city's doing, and it just goes around. But I don't think we spend enough time doing that. So.
Yeah. So I'll drop a little flip side on that, because I think one thing we do is, I think we're a little bit consultant happy, and I think we try to get Toronto to come to us and tell us what our things are, like numerous like transit projects where they want to try to make a big open greenway on and make it part of transit and stuff. And that's one thing if you're like in a skyrise part of a city and you're looking for some green space to break it up, but we could use the density. We could use that as an opportunity to have housing or have services or have community economic development, all kinds of things that are more Winnipeg based. But I think we and Toronto specifically, because I from what I understand, there's been like, that's sort of where the consultants come from. That's where a lot of the big construction firms who seem to not quite understand how cold it gets in winter and may not fully plan their construction pours in a way and which is, again, that's a Winnipeg that's a Winnipeg opportunity to solve a Winnipeg problem. That Winnipeggers know all about. Like, ask any concrete person who pours in Winnipeg what it is to, like, what you actually have to do to make sure this concrete sets if you're trying to pour it in the middle of winter.
That's one thing that I've never quite understood is the pothole thing. When you think of it, I mean, it's not just us. It's any kind of winter city in North America, any winter city in Europe.
Yeah, Norway has good roads.
How many trillions of dollars do all of these cities put together spend on fixing potholes? Yeah, and nobody's come up with a good way to fix potholes that will last. With all these polymers, and we're in the Idea Lab at the library, 3D printing and all these amazing things, and it's like, really, nobody's kind of come up with a lasting pothole filler. And every once in a while you read, we're looking at straw, and we're looking at whatever, and but they never. It's usually just asphalt that they dump in the hole, and it's like, well, we've been doing that for 120 years, and I can't believe that nobody has cracked that nut. Like somewhere, Chicago, or someplace in Sweden or something like that hasn't kind of said, oh yeah, no, we know how to.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are. Well, one thing I think it starts with the way we build roads to start with. Like, I was talking with a friend yesterday about, you drive down North Dakota, and as soon as you hit the border, you're like, why don't we have roads like this? You go to like Norway, and I mean, they have, they do a much better job of maintaining their infrastructure, and how. Because they have different funding models, because a lot of things. But
like North Dakota, I mean, there's the feds put a lot of money into major infrastructure in the states. And so a lot of like the interstate system, I think, is a federal system. So I mean, you got a multi-trillion-dollar organization that can pay for that. Whereas here,
but I mean,
it's the city stuck. The city stuck with doing it.
Portage Avenue is still Route 1, though, right?
Absolutely.
Why, if the federal government wants that to be theirs,
I think the province has to kick in for if it's a highway that runs through the city. I think the province is. I once upon a time that was the case. I don't know if it still is.
So I think there's also maybe a little bit of like we're sort of apprehensive to be the one to try new things or to because I think there are some technologies.
Sticking your neck out in Winnipeg never gets you any applause.
No, and I mean, because I think there are some places that are trying to solve that kind of problem, and I've heard a number of years ago, but a beet juice coating on roads and sidewalks that make snow clearing easier, gives the road like a winter coating basically. And
your whole city looks like there's been a massacre.
I mean, maybe that's what's holding us back, is that we just like it seems like a wacky idea, but it's it's worked in some rural situations, and maybe there is a certain application for that. Maybe that's part of city maintenance is just having better having the snow clearing, having better disposal of snow, so you just don't get those little build-up kind of things. I mean, I'm sure that there are people that care a lot and are would be interested in solving that, but we don't.
And probably some people at City Hall, I've talked to a lot.
Well, how many councillors would love if people would stop calling them to fix their roads?
And people who work in the departments.
I
mean, they're the pros. They probably all know. Sometimes people, when they get mad about what is, the city did this, and it's like, what? Chances are the planners came up with that, but then. The councillors looked at it and said, no bloody way you're doing that. Or, 6 people showed up at a meeting and they backed down. So I've also seen a lot of good stuff the planners and different in different departments have tried to do that just gets shot down at the council, because it's that dance, right? Between the professional, whether it be recyclers or, waste management people or road repair people or planners, and the political reality of
how do I sell this to the public?
Exactly.
How do I?
We got to be able to sell this, and that ain't good. If we have to we can make it 100 times better if we have to expropriate 6 houses. But I'm not being the public face of expropriating 6 houses. So,
I mean, there's a lot of balancing that gets done, I guess, in negotiating the making of a city. So I mean, we've talked a lot about the development end. I would like to get your thoughts on graffiti. I think that's sort of. I talked about this a little bit in another podcast, but it's graffiti and murals and sort of operating in a public space, and sort of one being a permission thing and one being sort of a non-permission thing. They're both kind of the community saying like this is what we want, or this is our comment on the space that we're living in. Like if if
mm,
someone's graffitiing, that maybe that means that that's a protest.
Yeah,
thing.
yeah.
Like they're saying
Center protest.
I don't.
Well,
I need to be heard somewhere in this space, and this is how I do it.
if that's the case, that would be okay. I think a lot of people just do it because they want to be smart and they want to see their name all over.
Yeah,
all
I mean,
over
there's
town.
like.
I mean, as a historic building guy, I hate it because
Yeah.
you spray paint an old 120-year-old brick building, and
Yeah.
that's you can't get spray paint out of a 120-year-old brick.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess it's part of urban. It has always been, I think, part of urban life. Well,
Yeah.
I don't know, 120 years.
I mean,
ago,
the first cave paintings were
yeah,
graffitis,
exactly,
right?
exactly. No, like I said, I just wish you see some great, or some of those ghost signs in the Exchange District are disappearing because somebody wants to put their name on them. So it's like, I think, like everything, right time, right place, right time, right space.
Yeah.
To choose it. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I see that kind of as like it's a sign too of the health of your downtown. Say, like, I mean, if like Vancouver's downtown, for example, has a whole bunch of spots that are like graffiti walls that professional graffiti,
that can
and
go
it's
and do well,
and
see,
super
again,
super cool.
Right,
I mean, you've made
right space, right?
Yeah, you've made an alleyway nice like no one else, but I think that there's also sort of like a component where I mean, I had a little flirtation with graffiti culture and kind of doing some of that stuff. Like I like climbing up on buildings. I think that's one of the coolest ways to experience Winnipeg is from the tops of buildings. Like I used to rent a jam space up on the Grain Building, and you could get out on the roof. You could hear bands playing at Old Market, and like I mean, to me that's like so Winnipeg is like. Sitting on a rooftop and hearing some music, and so yeah, I mean, there's part of me that feels like that's part of the Winnipeg spirit is like like you were saying before, have these old warehouses that used to have like parties and shows and artists and all kinds of stuff like that, and that's. Some way that's that public speaking back and saying, hey, we don't have this spot anymore. We don't have, I mean, not that every graffiti artist is an artist per se, but, taking that willingness to just take their voice or take a public space back and, yeah, I mean, it's sort of a subtle negotiation. It's kind of part of the, like, we're not happy part of where I am in this public space. Like, I'm just, if I was a graffiti artist, I would be doing it at places that I felt are, not contributing their share to the community or not, like most places that are a part of their community have that kind of community safety about it. Like, they'll it's like you don't throw eggs at your grandma's house, so when there are institutions that are in place that are, community positive, then, and those are the kind of places that put up murals and do all that kind of stuff, that I think, like I see some potential in using arts and culture and Winnipeg being such a cultural city and such an artistic city that like maybe this is a public forum for us to talk about these issues. Like maybe we need to put a big board that says.
Actually, I like that idea. It kind of reminds me on a very much smaller scale, site of Spence neighborhood. Building on Sherbrooke, Maryland, I guess, and Ellis. Has a "Before I die, I want to" chalkboard, right? And the chalk is out there. They color on it, and they fill in different things and stuff like that. That would be cool, to have graffiti boards, to have boards like that, to have stuff that is a message. Maybe I'm just obtuse, but I don't see the message in somebody's tag on the back of a garage or something.
Yeah.
But something like that, I do. I stop and I actually read that before I die.
Yeah, yeah.
Just to see what people are saying, and I have no doubt that there are some artists out there that have great commentary, with their graffiti. But
yeah, for sure, it's not everyone. I mean, it bothers me when I see graffiti on top of better graffiti. Like, don't.
Oh, and where was I recently that there was a really nice mural that got tagged?
Yeah.
Like right in like the guy's face. And I was
Yeah.
like, really? Like that? I thought that was the.
Yeah.
You
The code of honor for.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
That or if you're gonna do it off in the side. But it was like right in the face of the main character of it and stuff like that. Yeah, at least with the murals and actually, what I would support is doing colorful graffiti on all those bloody gray buildings. What is it? Everybody who repairs a building, it's gray. It's gray with dark gray tone.
Yeah.
Or it's light gray with dark gray accents.
Yeah, right.
And everybody's painted. I mean, I guess we're in a morose period of history or whatever.
This is our pre-morning period.
Look terrible. They have this buildings that are. Tyndall stone, or were not that some of them were great colorful, but go down Henderson Highway, about 14 or 15 buildings.
Yeah, I saw that you posted that on.
In a short period, they were all like gray, like no other color.
Yeah,
just gray, different shades of gray, and I don't know what that. So that I would probably support. It's colorful.
So is that like the city color? Like
I guess. Yeah, some colorful artists want to go out and like tag all those ugly gray buildings.
Yeah.
To give them so that they're not the same color as the pavement out front.
Yeah.
Or the color of Winnipeg for 3 months of the year, right? During the spring when all the snow's melting.
Yeah.
I'd probably be okay with that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah, there are solutions, and if there are ways that we can force the issue, I think there are people out there that are ready to do it. Not that I'm advocating any kind of graffiti or any crimes at all. But yeah, I mean that's testing where those city limits are and where where our comfort zone is, and once in a while, I think pulling us out of our comfort zone, I think, is important to do.
And I should say, no, I do believe that messaging is important. I remember years ago, you couldn't put something on a street lamp, like a poster.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And actually, it was the only time I've ever been arrested.
Oh.
I was putting I was with some political group. It was like an anti-free trade group, and we were putting up posters.
Yeah, because that's your community
that I still
billboard.
Do all the time because I do community programming.
Yeah.
It's like, how do you get the word out to the community?
This is how it.
Oh, we're having a tree walk at this park. Well, you gotta go out.
Yeah.
And at the time, they were really cracking. They tried to really stop people from putting posters on telephone poles for some reason.
Yeah.
And I guess they had this kind of sweep where the police were picking up.
It's a
and
dragnet
I actually got taken to the vice station and got written a ticket. And and it was like, oh my God. So I guess I shouldn't maybe be too hard on graffiti people, because there I was trying to do my message and I got arrested for it.
Well, I mean, and that's just a matter of what where this
where
you
the
define
were at that time.
Yeah.
And nowadays, I mean, except for all of my stuff, I mean, any walking tour, I mean, that's go around the place you're doing the walking tour and you put up a whole bunch of posters. So obviously that's and for bands and
that's community news, right?
Yeah, exactly. That's
you go
where you get your stuff out. So maybe I shouldn't be so harsh.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's okay. I mean, that's part of the conversation, and takes all people sitting around each other to see all the sides.
Yeah.
So that's a lot of Winnipeg history and some glimpses into the inner workings of the machinations of City Hall.
That was really fun. That was really. Nice. It's nice. I'm always kind of a generally positive guy about the city. I mean, I know there are bad things, but I think that there are things that need to change and things that need to improve. But generally, I'm a positive guy about the city. I mean,
you're a Winnipeg optimist.
people come here from around the world, to live here, and a lot of improvements, a lot of things have to be done, and the wealth in the city isn't distributed properly, and there are people falling through the cracks. But I think compared to a lot of cities, I think we've done a pretty good job, and we've had a huge influx of like investment in the last few years that we haven't seen in decades and decades. And I think people just have to work together to just make sure that increase in investment, all these new buildings going up, this new money coming into the city, just gets spread around better, and that people are willing to listen to it. Like I said, it's businesses, politicians, investors, developers, nonprofit groups, bike groups, graffiti artists. It all has to work together for it to work. And I'm just always a little afraid that I don't spend a huge amount of time. It might look like I spend a huge amount, but I usually I usually post where I have to post and get the heck out. But I'm just afraid that with so many and kind of newer generations just kind of using online as their thermometer for how things are going. Like, things are blowing up on Twitter, and it's like but you know what? In real life, I doubt if you walk down to wherever that was, nobody would be talking about that. And we used to have a thing in when I worked for an MP for a while. It was the bubble, right? So you go to Ottawa. I worked in a Winnipeg office, but once or twice a year we got to go to Ottawa, and you talk to the Ottawa staff, and they would be like, oh, things are going crazy, and this issue, and how many people have called the Constitute office about this? And you'd be like, none. I've never even heard of it. What's the issue? There's some, but it would be something because some blowing up federally or in the national media, but it wasn't really. It's not. It didn't matter to people back at home, and I just kind of hope that people maybe, there's that online bubble that it's like, take yourself out of that bubble for a while. And just meet the people.
Walk through your community, right?
Last night I did a walking tour in Central Park. Just a little history tour, and I had an arborist with him. We talked about trees, and there must have been, this was from like 6:30 to 7:30, there must have been 300 people in Central Park.
Oh, okay.
It was like the Forks. It was people everywhere, and all the benches were full with just people sitting out and chatting and waving over to friends. All the picnic tables were full. There were people out there eating. They have the soccer net on one side, so there are a few people playing soccer. They have a volleyball net on the other side. There were people sitting around the fountain, just looking, and just kids running around on the field. It was one of the busiest places I had ever seen in the city, other than maybe the Forks on a special occasion. It was packed, or the parking lot
after a Bomber game.
Exactly. It was packed, and it's like, well, this is downtown. Like downtown is dead. Well, here it is on a Tuesday night at 6:30. There's hundreds of people. Sadly, now when we talk about downtown development, is like those people don't spill over into what we think of as downtown, and it's like, well, that's too bad. But go out, if you're like, oh, downtown's such a crap hole, and it's, go out to places on downtown. Well, bring yourself out of your car. Go to Central Park. Go hang out. Go walk around the Exchange. Even on Portage. Go have a couple of beers on a patio on Portage and just. Well,
that's how these places get better, right? Like, I mean, you actually have to go and support and show up there and.
Exactly. It'd be part of that solution, and also kind of see that, oh, it's not like, what some guy who lives in, Fort White and vowed 20 years ago never to go downtown, and his online perception of what downtown is. Don't listen to that. Go downtown. Go downtown, or go to the places. Go talk to people. Go to committee meetings. If you're interested in what's happening in your neighborhood, go visit your local women's center. Like, go drop off $20 at the women's center in your neighborhood, and just say, so what do you guys do here? What do you do in my neighborhood to make it? And just have that kind of curiosity about your city that in the online world I don't think that people have. I think people make their mind up and recruit a bunch of people around them that have made their mind up, and they sort of are the ruling class of the opinion of a certain topic. And yeah, I think that's generally positive, but that I think we have to be that I think get out from the online world and get into the real world.
Yeah. Well, big task. I mean, that's it's a hard draw. The internet.
Yeah.
It's got us all sucked in some way. But I think that's a really great message. That's I mean, something that I would like to spread is just get out and see it for yourself. And yeah, I mean, I think there's so many great places, restaurants, all kinds of things that are just under your nose. I mean, Winnipeg, I think, is a just under your nose kind of city, and if you know how to navigate it, and you know a little bit how to get around, and a little bit who to ask, and how to go about things. But there is a wealth of cool activities and places to go, and all kinds of fun things that are happening.
Yeah, absolutely. And pick a park from a part of the neighborhood, from part of the city that you've never been to, and just say, oh, I'll go to that park.
Yeah.
And just go bring a little cooler with some sandwiches and a couple of drinks, and just lay out.
Normalize picnics.
Exactly. Lay out a blanket and just people watch for a little bit. Get a feel for that neighborhood. That stop at the one of the corner stores in there, and buy a canned drink and walk around or at a coffee shop or something, and just pick a new neighborhood and just walk around it.
Yeah. There's lots to see and lots to do, and if you're bored in Winnipeg, you're not trying hard enough.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, Christian. Well, thanks for coming in and talking.
Thank you very much for having me. This is very enjoyable.
Yeah, if we can do this again sometime, that'd be great.
Yeah,
and for everyone listening, if you want to get a little more history, know a little bit about more about your communities, you can check out WestEndDumplings on Instagram.
It's Blogspot. So WestEndDumplings.blogspot.com.
Okay. And yeah, get involved in your communities. Go for a walk. All right. Thanks.